In 2024, the state legislature required special districts to establish goals and performance objectives, and the board adopted these goals and objectives in October 2024. An annual report is required to be published on the district's website by December 1 of each year. Our first one will be this year, this coming December. Our mission obviously is pretty simple. We're a single-purpose drainage district, and the core mission is to provide flood control and protect the water supply for communities within its jurisdiction. Our goals are to operate and maintain flood control infrastructure and ensure effective drainage and sufficient water supply. We protect flood control infrastructure to ensure ongoing services to a growing population, engage and inform the public of water management and flood control responsibilities. The outline today, the outline of this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about weather and water management over the last year, key capital projects, and we've got some pretty significant capital projects that we've completed that have been going on for a while we're going to talk about. Canal rehabilitation program being one of those. We have our normal maintenance activities, which is a job in and of itself that is very significant, and a regulatory program and administrative functions. With regard to weather, overall, Lake Worth Drainage District experienced near average annual rainfall. We got about 95% of our normal rainfall. It's about 57 inches, averages around 60. No significant flood events occurred. We had some close calls, but we were lucky this year. And we pretty much had normal water supply operations, but that looks like it's going to change, and I'll talk to you about that in a little bit. In the fall of 2024, we experienced significantly below average rainfall, and this is likely due to the La Nina event that's occurring out in the equatorial Pacific that has an effect on dry season weather here in South Florida. So far, we're probably 30% of average rainfall. And that's left us in a situation that we're on the edge of a drought. This is the U.S. Drought Monitor published by the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration. Pretty much has the whole state under abnormally dry conditions. A couple of spots in the Panhandle in North Florida that are in a moderate drought. We expect that may continue, if not worsen, as we move forward. The reason for that is when you look at the projections for this La Nina event that we're in, it's anticipated we're going to see significantly below average rainfall as we move into the spring of 2025. So it's not likely to get better than the current condition, and it's probably more likely it's going to get worse. I show this just to kind of give you a sense of what we've done water-wise over the year. Our control elevation is around 15.5, between 15.5 and 16. So in the wet season, and that's this range of this graph, dry season, this range of this graph, you can see little green lines of rainfall, basically each day. And obviously not much in the dry season. But we pump water in, kind of manage between 15 to 15.5, which is kind of a normal operating range. Then when the wet season kicked in, you can see a lot more rain down here, and you see these water levels start to drop. And the reason is because we're opening the gates, let the water out. So you can see a lot of gate activity associated with these stage variations. We had a couple of pre-storm drawdowns. I'll talk about one of those in a few minutes in anticipation of the storm, kind of bringing the system down to increase storage. And then when the rain stops, and this was like the beginning, middle of October, then we went back to pumping operations. And because of this indication that it's going to get dry and may get drier, we've been pushing a little harder to push water levels above what our normal control elevation is. Obviously, Lake Okeechobee plays a big part in our dry season operations. As we've talked about for the past 3 years, the new regulation schedule for Lake Okeechobee is now official. It's in place. The colonel, or the general in Atlanta signed it about the middle part of last year, and the Corps of Engineers is currently operating under that schedule. The current stage is around 1493 NGVD. That's a great place to be at the end of the wet season as you prepare for the upcoming dry season. The problem is it's been high for several years. The Corps of Engineers has been concerned that that's going to have impacts to lake littoral zone vegetation, and they've initiated what they call a recovery protocol, which is intended to push water out of the lake in the dry season in order to bring the lake down quickly before the spawning season in the estuaries. Because when you let the water out of the lake, it goes into the estuaries and it impacts those coastal ecosystems. So they want to get that done early so that when the spring recruitment for fisheries and oysters and things like that happens, they can stop those releases. Problem is, their goal is to bring the lake down to between 11.5 and 12.5 feet in GVD. At 10 feet in GVD, you can no longer get water out of the lake. So if they stop at 11.5, they got 1.5 feet before we literally run out of water from Lake Okeechobee. So it's kind of a precarious spot. If we're lucky and rain starts on June 1, maybe it's not a problem. But it's a bit of a rolling the dice, I guess I call it, with the risk that if the dry season extends further into June or maybe July, we might have a problem with water from Lake Okeechobee. Now we'll talk about Hurricane Milton, which was probably our closest call this year for a major rain event. Early forecasts predicted that it was significant rainfall and maybe even historic rain event. And there were areas in the state that did get historic rain from Milton, as well as other parts of the country. We initiated a pre-storm canal drawdown on October 3rd and authorized the communities that had operable structures that they could open those structures in advance of the storm. We maintain canal elevations, as I showed you earlier, at or below the design operational stage. We maintain canal elevations through the storm to avoid submergence impacts to the communities. In other words, if the water's too high, communities can't get water out of their lake system. So we manage that. And there were emergency operations taken during the event to address some potential flooding in 2 residential communities, Boca Chase and Lake Charleston, that had compromised or failing infrastructure that needed to be dealt with. And we authorized post-storm community structure openings on October 10th to kind of any of the water that we got from the rain event, we were able to discharge once the storm had passed. And I'm not going to go into detail of this, but last year we kind of unveiled our water management dashboard, and this is from our SCADA system and from all our remote monitors, remote rain gauges. We now have a way to look in real time at what's going on in the system. And for events like Milton, it's a great way to kind of forensically look back at what we did and say, well, did we do a good job? Could we do something better? And like I said, without going into detail, these little bumps here are rainfall for each day during Milton. This blue lines are normal operating range. These series of lines here are all water levels in the 16 basin, and basically it showed we never went above our control elevation as we went through the storm. And we can kind of say, well, what were we doing when the communities were discharging? What were we doing at the peak of the storm? And these traces down here are the actual gate openings. Each individual gate we can trace exactly when it opened, how long it stayed open, how wide was it open, how much water was flowing through it, and when it closed. So this is a great tool we use real time, we can use after the storm, kind of explain to people what we did, how we did it, why we did it. We had another milestone this last year, and that was the C51 Phase 1 reservoir became operational. And we received the first request to pass water from a reservoir out there on 20 Mile Bend into the C51. We picked it up from the C51, pushed it through our system down to the Hillsborough Canal, where Broward County could pump water from the Hillsborough into their canal system to meet that. So we pumped the water in around 184 acre-feet, wasn't a lot. It's Control 9. We did it 8 hours a day for 7 days, and then we discharged it at Control Structure 17, 2 hours a day. We had one gate open 1 foot, and that's the water coming out of the gate. So it wasn't a lot of water, but it was important that, I don't know, this agency worked with the Water Management District for the better part of 20 years in implementing this system. We being a critical part to move water from one point to the other, and this was the first time that it actually did its job. The other thing we've been working on, and we're almost done, is the completion of our comprehensive hydrologic modeling effort. And basically what that is, and this map kind of a very complicated way of saying we model the entire water movement structure within our district. We completed the hydrology in phase 1, hydraulics phase 2. We compiled it so that now is a functional hydrologic model, and we're finishing up the calibration, which proves that does the model represent what actually happens in the real world. The goal is this spring we issue a final report, and that will supersede the previous study that's now 30 years old. So we'll now have a state-of-the-art new interbasin study that we can use as we're permitting, regulating, operating the future of this system. Another big milestone, we've talked about this for the better part of a decade, refurbishment of Control Structure 9. You remember we were going to replace it, and the cost just got too crazy, and we decided to do a major refurbishment. That's taken a series of years, and the last step was to replace these radial gates that you see in the photograph, and we did that in January of 2020. Remember the presentation I gave you back 2015? I estimated it would take 20 years to do it, and we did it in half the time. Again, thanks to the board for funding contractor services to help us double that effort. And so we are now safe from having trees falling and collapsing from our property into our canals and impacting flow. And here's some before and afters. This is Lakes of Del Rey, L34. You can see before, we had some heavy vegetation that was kind of, threatening. If a wind came, that thing, the tree right there could fall over and block that canal. That's been cleaned, slopes have been dressed. Similar situation here. You can see the stake is our boundary line. So we'll clean that up. This is L45. Similar situation. One bank was just totally overgrown. Now that's clear. We're getting ready to, and we'll talk about this in a minute, address these canal slopes, reconstruct the design section. This was there next to the Pine Job Environmental Center. We've talked a lot about that. We had a berm there that we had to remove, but first we had to get the vegetation down. That's been completed. So now we focus on the maintenance restoration program, kind of called the MRP. Some people refer to it as the CRP Phase 2. Basically, is to restore. Now that we've got the trees out of the way, we got to restore the canal bank, restore the canal section. We completed inventory in 2023. We've identified 500 projects, encompassing about 250 miles, and we expect this project will take 20 years because it's slow and laborious, and you got a big machine and you move a lot of dirt, and it takes a fair amount of time. So to give you an example of what that step looks like, this is 10 years ago. The canals looked like this, where one side was completely inaccessible and the risk of these trees falling in the canal was pretty high. We went through the CRP, removed that vegetation, looked like this afterwards, but still, the canal banks are eroded, the channels are in bad shape. The next step, bank restoration, is to come in and dress it up and make it look like the canals that were intended in 1915 when the system was conceptualized. A little engineering detail, you have two kind of conditions. We need at least 10 feet to be able to mow that low maintenance side. And if we have the 10 feet, we can leave this grass and do some stone bedding so we can mow with an arm mower this side. But we have less than 5 feet, you can't get a mower out there. You have to maintain it from the opposite side of the canal. In that situation, we're going to put rock rubble revetment and then just spray that low maintenance bank. And here's a before and after of one of those projects where we didn't have the room to be able to get up there and do maintenance. So we basically just rock this side, and then we do the maintenance, vegetation maintenance from this side, the high maintenance side. We have a timeline. Tony Lacasas has come up with, kind of the outline of a program. These are the first few projects that we're going to go. But again, this goes out to 2045 for ultimate completion. So it's a big job, and it's going to take a while. Well, we cleared the low maintenance side, right? They don't have trees on them anymore. But we got to maintain it, otherwise 10 years from now we're going to wake up and it's going to look just like it did in 2015. So we've established a low-maintenance team to mow the narrow banks, and you need specialized equipment to operate with those narrow land margins. We hired 4 new employees in 2024 to staff 2 small teams that can support routine year-round maintenance of 2 times a year. Each one of those sections should be addressed with regard to vegetation maintenance, etc. Kevin McPherson has been promoted to crew leader to oversee both of these teams, and they're currently maintaining 153 miles of low maintenance bank. And of course, we're adding more and more as we go through these projects. Again, so focus on the low maintenance side. This is what it looked like before. You know, we used to kind of joke, it really is no maintenance side back then, right? So you really couldn't get there with the trees and everything else that had grown in. But after this program, you can see now it's clear, and now you can access it with, you know, like I said, specialized equipment to get in there and keep it mowed and maintained so it doesn't revert back to that heavily vegetated condition. On the high maintenance side, that's the typical, that side's been open, like I said, 100 years, and we routinely mow that. So we've had about 1,500 miles of flat mowing, about 283 miles we get to 4 to 6 times per year. We have 1,200 miles of slope mowing, that's with that arm mower on the bottom here. And we have, for 2024, we had annual contract for mowing services of $277,000. They mowed about 125 miles of flat mowing 4 times a year and 140 miles of slope mowing 4 times a year. Canal vegetation management is important, both aquatic and terrestrial. We treated almost 6,000 acres of aquatic vegetation. About 1,000 of that was floating, 640 acres of submerged, that's vegetation grows on the bottom. We had about 1,100 acres of littoral vegetation and about 3,000 acres of littoral and floating vegetation combined. We treated 400 acres of terrestrial treatment. Most of that was on low maintenance banks that are unable to be mowed, like I discussed earlier. And we had annual contracted services, about $93,000 north of C-51 Canal and in the Boca Basin. We're currently maintaining 136 booms to catch this floating vegetation as the wind blows or water currents blow it around. And we have 136 booms in 91 locations. We replaced 28 booms in 17 locations due to wear and tear or boat traffic, because boats kind of run over them, you know, get around. We continued mechanical removal of aquatic vegetation to supplement chemical treatment, and developing a procedure to notify owners of private canals that discharge into us that they need to maintain their canal vegetation once we place a boom in. We're trying to keep their, if they don't maintain their vegetation when it comes in, that becomes our problem. We're working with them to treat their issue with vegetation in their canal before it gets to us and costs us money and effort. With regard to canal maintenance, we do routine dredging, shoal removal, things like that. About 24 miles this last year. Our tree crew did vertical side trimming, about 38 miles, because we've got all the vegetation that was on our canal. That's now gone. But now we have adjacent property owners that have vegetation that's kind of hanging over on us. So we have to go through and side trim those big trees and other types of vegetation to reduce the risk of their vegetation falling in our right-of-way in a major wind event. Oh, and we installed 16 new access gates. And again, this is the typical canal maintenance tree crew. Again, you can see this vegetation is not on our right-of-way, but it's hanging over from the adjacent property onto us. And so we routinely go through, the tree crew goes through and side trims those trees to kind of keep them back on their side of the property. And we do that fairly routinely. Here's another example, Canal L14 and Military Trail. We had some homeless people kind of living in vegetation next to some of this vegetation, but we went in there with the help of the adjacent property owner and cleared vegetation behind the fences, and so you can see that issue been remediated. And here's another example, L10 west of Jog Road, kind of similar situation where, you know, we had vegetation on a fence line, and with the help of the community next door, we cleaned that up and it's in good shape. Structure maintenance, obviously, the control structure is a big part of what we do. It's going to be a bad day if we have to try to open a gate and it doesn't open, right? So we work 364 days a year, keeping the system functional so that one day that we need those gates open, they open without question. And of course, part of that now is the SCADA system, our telemetry system that allows us to remotely, middle of the night, weekend, New Year's Eve, open those gates, close them remotely. We've contracted with Gray Matter for an ongoing SCADA assessment, and we've implemented numerous system improvements and updated the SCADA user interface, again, to make sure that thing's ready to roll the minute we need the gates open. This is Reagan's favorite program, maintaining infrastructure, guana control. We initiated a pilot project for guana control, because you can see, most of the time you see them kind of scurrying around. They don't like to hurt anything, but when they burrow in the side slope of our banks, it's a bad situation. You can imagine a piece of heavy equipment coming across here and collapsing as that burrow goes under our right-of-way. It could put the equipment and the personnel operating equipment in a pretty precarious situation. And we go through the utilization. I won't go through the details, but pretty much our utilization has been consistent for the past few years. Some years are better than others, but not by very much, as you can see from these graphs. This is the heavy equipment utilization chart. This is the mower utilization chart. We've got a little bit better utilization this year than last year, or I should say 24 as opposed to 23. Now, with regard to right-of-way regulation, and this is the program that deals with people that want to put stuff on our right-of-way. We received 305 new right-of-way permit applications. We issued 307 new permits. We've issued an additional 143 right-of-way permit modifications, extensions, transfers, and other related letters such as objection, no objection, dewatering, etc. We completed 632 plat and development reviews for county and municipal development projects. We researched and responded to 1,471 Chancery Case 407 review requests. I won't even go there. We completed 7 topographic surveys with cross-sections and staked more than 3 miles of canals to support the canal rehabilitation projects. Regarding regulation, we had 3,211 permit compliance deliverables. This map here shows all of the existing compliance issues that we currently have. And like I said, we've got 3,000 deliverables coming this day due for 1,570 individual permits. We collected over $16,000 in service agreement fees and $190,000 in annual permit fees. We opened 233 new compliance cases and resolved or closed 239, obviously some of those being backlogged. And the staff continues to work on closing out the backlog or the legacy compliance issues. Over 100 cases have been acted upon. If they're not resolved, in other words, if we can't get the landowner to resolve them, we'll issue a notice of encroachment, which is recorded in the public record to notify current and future owners that that condition exists. And of course, we can come in and remove those obstructions, but it's based on our availability and is prioritized based on the canal restoration schedules I mentioned earlier. It's kind of hard to see in this picture, but here's an example. Before this fence, the property owner had built it some distance into our right-of-way. It's kind of difficult to see, but they voluntarily removed it, relocated it once being notified. This was one that's been around for decades. This is Turnpike. This is Lakes of Delray Estates, the E2W Canal west of the Turnpike, south of Atlantic Boulevard. Years ago, when the district was cleaning out this canal, we put the spoil material on our right-of-way to use it in future, canal remediation. Subsequent to that, either through natural recruitment or some of the adjacent property owners planting vegetation on it, it became kind of a sound barrier, visual buffer to the turnpike that everybody in the community got used to over 20 or 30 years. So when we decide, okay, we're taking the vegetation down, we're taking the dirt, we're going to do some of the work that Tony needs to do to rehabilitate the canals, got not a great reaction from the community, right? To their credit, they got together recognizing that we needed to utilize our right-of-way and that material that we'd stockpiled there for our purposes, and that they were going to need to kind of come together as a community and deal with the buffer situation. So we went in with, again, after a lot of coordination with the community, we removed the material, recovered that access to that right-of-way, and then after that was done, they came through and built a noise or visual barrier because you never could get a commit from the turnpike to do it. So they took it upon themselves to do it. And I said, to me, end of the day, it's a win-win. You know, they got the protection they need and deserve and were willing to implement. We got the function of our right-of-way return. So that's kind of how it should be done. This is a temple on L50. Near Canary Palm Drive. Before, they had a fence that was buried in there. There was a lot of vegetation. We couldn't get access to the canal. But again, working with the temple representatives, we were able to come in and clear this out. And now, you know, they've got a cleaner situation, and we've got a canal that we can maintain. With regard to technological tools that we rely on, one of them is Geographic Information Systems, or GIS. And we've got, as you've seen from the maps that we've shown you earlier, we've tried to put all of our information in a spatial format so we can look at it on a map. One of the things you need to do is have kind of a historical aerial perspective so we can say, well, we know what the land looks like now. There's the airport, 2024. What did it look like in 1940? And then how did it get from 1940 to 1924 with all the intervening years in between? We now have a pictorial reference embedded in our GIS system that we can look at to see kind of the evolution of development within the district at specific locations. Public records and information. This is, in this age, it's a big deal. We continue your public presence at community meetings and outreach with homeowners associations through websites and newsletters. We hosted our 10th annual flood control workshop where we meet with homeowner association representatives, property managers, and the public to kind of explain how we do what we do and how they fit into that. We addressed over 1,000 inquiries from the public during storm events, after storm events, etc. We completed the district records retention plan, which is, you know, we've been spending the last 10 years or longer digitizing these old records that have been around this agency for 100 years, getting them in a digital format. Now we got to make sure they're organized in a form that everybody can get to and that we can effectively utilize. And that includes a memo you write today. And that initiated this reorganization of electronic records to meet those business needs. We scanned 22,718 documents and disposed of 40 cubic feet of records, and we reclaimed a lot of square footage in this building doing that. We now have space for people and meetings and other things that we didn't have before because we were storing physical documents. Staffing, the total number of staff has not increased in more than 15 years. We have 93 budgeted positions for current vacancies. We have an average of 10.5 years of service for the current employees. And we hired 23 employees in 2024. I mean, that's a big number, and I kind of have to hand it to Melissa for dealing with that. You know, you don't just like step out on the street and say, hey, you want a job, and come on in and go to work. We have to like identify the need, we have to post the position, we advertise, we get interested parties, we then schedule interviews, we go through review of their backgrounds, we give them an offer, then we bring them in. It's a long and arduous process, and we went through 23 of those in 2024. We had 2 employees that retired some time ago, came back. And we have 10 current employees enrolled in DROP, and will be retiring within the next 8 years. So I think we didn't have a lot of turnover in this agency in years past, but I think we're seeing that, and it's consistent with what's going on everywhere in the country and in the world. Another big one is we implemented a training program for retention of entry-level staff, particularly in mowers and heavy equipment, with giving them access to CDL training. And that's working in conjunction with Palm Beach State College. Tony has been leading the charge on that to work out a cooperative training program so we can give our staff access to CDL training to get licensed so they can move up through the ranks, through the different difficulty levels from mowing to heavy equipment, say they're heavy equipment. We're conducting classification compensation studies in 2025 to make sure that our positions and employees are compensated fairly, and we're comparing them obviously to counties, cities, water management districts, and other entities. With regard to financial highlights, the auditors issued an unqualified opinion for 2023. Financial records and statements are fairly and appropriately stated in accordance with the generally accepted accounting principles. And we adopted a 2025 budget of $17.3 million with a decrease in annual assessment. And I don't know the last time that was done, but it's been a long time. And not very many agencies that you look around the state have done that. It wasn't a huge assessment. We reduced non-ad valorem annual assessment by $1 from $49.50 to $48.50. But it reflects the district's ongoing commitment to maintaining and improving infrastructure while responsibly considering the financial implications to landowners. With regard to other revenues, we received permit fees of over $1 million. And our earned interest change in value was $1.4 million. Quick claim deeds, 2,000, we had 131,000 for the tower lease, and about 64,000 the sale of surplus equipment. So, again, this kind of looks at the assessment. So you can see this has been our history back from 2010, and you can see 2014 when Bob and I got here, and Reagan kind of went up a little bit. We were trying to fund these programs that I've been talking about, refurbishment, Control 9, CRP program, everything. And it held us steady, and then now we were able to reduce that somewhat, and we'll continue to have an eye open for those kind of opportunities with regard to the assessment in the future. Maintain health costs. I think we've done a really good job in the face of the recent economy. Back to 2008, you see 2009, we had a real spike, but since then, it's been pretty well controlled. So we're hopeful to try to continue that trend as we move forward. Insurance, a little bit different story. Insurance is property and casualty. It's really gone up in the last few years. You can see that we were just kind of right at the max that we've seen in recent history back to 2008, but that's going to be a challenge to manage as we move forward in coming years. Maintain salaries. I mentioned, we haven't increased positions, but by the same token, we've been able to maintain the salary, total salary level pretty well since 2009. Other fund balances, we have a capital project fund of $29.4 million, $18.4 million in revenue from the sale of the development units, the TDRs and the Ag Reserve, and that's committed for capital of water supply projects. And over the next year or so, we'll be talking about that in a little more detail. We have a self-insurance fund of $2.2 million, and our canal revetment fund, basically to buy the rock that I showed you earlier on those canal banks, of $1.1 million. Looking ahead, 2025 and beyond, the CRP Phase 2, that maintenance restoration program, is going to be a high priority. The restoration of the low maintenance canal banks and our canal sections, the management of existing structural encroachments on the right-of-way in order to get things that are in our way out of our way. We want to address those legacy compliance issues and clean up some of the encumbrances that have been around for a long time. We have ongoing capital projects for refurbishment of water control infrastructure. As mentioned, the hydrologic model is going to be important to this because we want to use that model to kind of show us where we have weak spots in our system hydrologically. And one of the areas we think it's going to point to is our secondary control structures. Not the 10 major ones that we've spent the last 10 years refurbishing, but we've got dozens of smaller ones all over the district that haven't been looked at in a long time. So we need to put some attention on those. The model is going to help us determine which one of those are the weakest points so we can prioritize that work. Regional water supply issues, I mentioned Lake Okeechobee schedule is in place. Everything in that analysis, that evaluation of that schedule showed an impact in water supply to southeast Palm Beach County. We objected, we wrote letters, we went and talked to people, nothing got done. We did the same thing when the Water Management District formulated and published their Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan, the most recent version. Same situation. Now what we got to do is watch this system work and demonstrate, prove, document those impacts, so we can kind of go back to those agencies and revisit portions of it, hopefully tweak it so that we're not as severely impacted as their analysis indicated. The Turnpike widening project is going to be going on for a while. We got right away on either side of the turnpike, so they want to get wider and we don't want them to. So we got to work with them over how that occurs, that they can increase capacity for traffic without decreasing capacity for flood control and water supply. And then, of course, campus facility planning. We're looking at the possibility of another structure on the campus. And again, it's real preliminary, but we'll bring that back to the board this year. So with that, our recommendation as the annual report to landowners provides an overview of the district's annual activities, including district activities undertaken in furtherance of the adopted water control plan. And we recommend acceptance of the report pursuant to Florida Statutes, Chapter 298.26. So we need a motion and a second and a vote.
We get a motion to approve the report.
Motion to approve.
All in favor, say aye.
Whitmore, second.
Or second.